In Acts 15, the apostles and elders of the Jerusalem church met with Paul to discuss the issue of pagan Gentiles who were turning to God. They agreed that forgiveness of sins comes through faith in Jesus Christ, and that Gentiles didn't have to be circumcised to be saved. But they did require Gentiles to observe some basic Torah commandments to be admitted into church fellowship. Paul and Barnabas returned to Antioch to tell the congregation what the council had decided. But after a few days, Paul set out from Antioch with Silas to visit the churches in Cilicia and Galatia. They traveled overland to Tarsus, Derbe, and Lystra before going on to Iconium. Paul met a young man in Lystra who would have an important role in the early church. Acts 16 verse 1 says, Paul came also to Derbe and to Lystra. A disciple was there named Timothy, the son of a Jewish woman who was a believer, but his father was a Greek. He was well spoken of by the brothers at Lystra and Iconium. Paul wanted Timothy to accompany him, and he took him and circumcised him because of the Jews who were in those places, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. As they went on their way through the cities, they delivered to them, for observance, the decisions that had been reached by the apostles and elders who were in Jerusalem. So the churches were strengthened in the faith, and they increased in numbers daily. This passage is a major problem for antinomian theologians who claim that God abolished circumcision and the law of Moses. Consider the irony here. Paul was carrying a letter from the Jerusalem Council telling the churches that Gentiles don't have to be circumcised to be saved. But at the same time, Paul circumcised Timothy. What is going on here? In the first century, it was very common for rabbis to travel from town to town, preaching the Word of God and recruiting talented young men to become disciples. This is exactly what Jesus did when he called the 12 disciples. Paul also traveled with a small entourage that assisted him with evangelism and church administration, and he invited Timothy to become a ministerial trainee. Since Timothy's father was a Greek, the Jews considered Timothy to be illegitimate and not part of the nation of Israel. The Jews generally avoided any social contact with Gentiles, which might have hindered Timothy's ability to enter a synagogue or minister to the Jews. However, according to the Mishnah, the Jews considered a circumcised Gentile proselyte to be born again as a full-fledged Israelite. Many people wrongly believe that Paul was opposed to circumcision, but Paul only objected to the forced circumcision of Gentiles so they could seek forgiveness of sins through sacrificial offerings at the Jerusalem temple. Paul taught that Christians receive forgiveness through faith in Jesus Christ, not the works of the law. God established the covenant of circumcision specifically for the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Paul was a Torah-observant Jew who believed in the practice of circumcision for Israelites. Timothy's father was a Gentile, but his mother was Jewish, so he was free to choose which path he would follow, and he chose to identify as a Torah-observant Jew. By doing so, Timothy reminds us that God didn't abolish the law of Moses, and he didn't replace the nation of Israel with the Christian church.